To support analysts and their work in monitoring and evaluating international issues, the Laboratory for Analytic Sciences has supported the development of a prototype to visualize and analyze the impact from foreign influence campaigns. This project is an ongoing effort to harmonize open source data regarding the economic and social impacts from Chinese influence campaigns and promote a spatial understanding of how influence affects communities. In the past 10 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the opportunity for foreign influence campaigns to occur strategically and with ease at the global level. Currently, we have defined influence campaigns as a coordinated effort to impact social, political, or economic dynamics of a group, and we're seeing that most often these campaigns are conducted through social media campaigns, developing strategic trade partnerships, or attempting to alter ongoing trade policies or routes, the implementation of cultural programs to promote a positive perception of the influencing nation, and of course, heavy investment. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is one of the largest ongoing influence campaigns and focuses on heavy investment into developed and developing countries in order to increase access to resources and markets. In response to some of the negative perception, cultural programs have been implemented to share China's cultural goodwill. In effect, Chinese immigration records have increased, which has continued to change the magnitude at which China has been able to impact in communities. For more background information regarding the empirical evidence which supports the need for further analysis and visualization of Chinese influence, you can visit LAS's work on the geopolitics of empire building, which occurred during 2021. To ensure an impactful continuation of the aforementioned work, our 2022 progress focused on providing a transitionable, scalable prototype to visualize the impact from Chinese influence campaigns. We valued the ability to analyze and visualize information across datasets and produce a prototype that can be scalable to classified datasets as well. We looked to harmonize 4 open source datasets to be consistent across space and time. The first is public opinion data, which was provided by Pew's Global Attitude Surveys to ensure that we had indicators for the perception on influence and the impact to local viewpoints. In addition, with China funding over $852 billion of investments worldwide over the past 10 years, tracking global investment expenditures remained extremely valuable, so we gathered this data of over 14,000 projects from GeoAid data. As mentioned before, Chinese immigration has also become relevant when evaluating the impact from influence. We gathered time series data to support empirical evidence regarding the Chinese diaspora. And lastly, as an example for Chinese implementation of cultural programs, we scraped and validated the existence of 665 Confucius Institutes, which are educational centers tasked with spreading Chinese goodwill. To support our visualization efforts and intuit what we should be visualizing, these datasets were utilized in analysis and modeling efforts as well to identify trends, commonalities, and relationships between features of influence. While our main goals did surround visualization efforts, it is valuable to still note the results of some of the models we built out. So first off, when looking at public perception of influence, we've identified that the locality of similar sentiment spreads beyond political boundaries, suggesting that the effects of influence are felt more similarly by groups within a close proximity to centers of influence or high areas of expenditure, Confucius Institute placement, migrant workers, or friendship cities. When evaluating standard of living indicators using forest methods to determine any anomalies, our findings consistently found that economic indicators, so material assets and employment, were more significant to determine the likelihood of favoring Chinese influence as opposed to locals' perceptions of their own wealth. So in other words, classes or one's belief system did not affect people's perceptions of Chinese influence as much as measurements of their actual well-being did. Lastly, we did identify some trends regarding typical expenditure patterns before, during, and after a memorandum of understanding was signed to officially register a partnering country with the Belt and Road Initiative. So, as depicted, most countries saw a high spike in infrastructure, debt forgiveness, and emergency response or cultural programs in the year prior to signing an MOU to boost favorability towards China's policies. And after a partnership was formed, investment stayed high with primary investments into communication and manufacturing sectors. This is not the case globally, but does represent a high trend that we saw within the dataset. So, of course, none of these factors can be evaluated in isolation, and that's why there is a need for further anticipating how these findings are impacted by the historical political changes within the country. So recent genocides, natural disasters, protests, and political system shifts all impact institutional strength and increase the likelihood for influence to occur. Through training models in a temporal sequence using similar principles from curriculum-based learning, we would be interested in trying to identify how this historical background would shift our understanding of current events. As our main goal does lie in providing analysts an opportunity to visualize and see how different datasets, when layered, can showcase the cumulative impact a strategic approach to influence can have on the surrounding area, we wanted to provide a demo of the prototype that has been created for this use case. So I'd like to set the stage for the next couple of minutes by presenting a case study that we'll be able to use when walking through the demo in order to see how the tool could be utilized to meet a hypothetical analyst goal. So a bit of backstory here. Imagine the day is January 12th, 2017. Nigeria had just declared that Taiwan's embassy would be relocated to Lagos, the old capital of the country and current trade hub. So this was stated very openly, I might add, to be a request from diplomatic representatives of China who were offended that Taiwan continued to ignore their one China policy by engaging with another head of state. In this case, the engagement was a congratulatory phone call between the president of Taiwan and President-elect Trump. So in retribution, China coerced Nigeria into severing ties with Taiwan and adopting their one China policy, which means that Taiwan only had two supporters left in Africa, Eswatini and Burkina Faso. As the U.S. has a vested interest in trade assistance programs with both these countries, but we'll focus on Eswatini for now, a political analyst has been assigned to look for factors that contributed to Nigeria's change in policy and evaluate if these same factors were present in the case of Eswatini. So I will jump over to the prototype now and give a brief demo on how you could go about identifying these factors using the prototype that we built out. So an analyst might go straight to trying to identify the factors that influence the shift in policy in Nigeria. By choosing a particular country, you can shift from looking at global perspectives to an in-detailed view of one particular region. From the country detail view, you can view the general statistics about the country, financial expenditures, immigration records over time with both U.S. and Chinese persons, and public opinion by region. Given the fact that our analyst scenario is focused on events in 2017, let's go ahead and narrow down the timeline to those dates. So we'll expand this selection later to get some hindsight regarding our analysis, but for now we'll limit it to 2017. So a couple of things to note that the dashboard is telling us about Nigeria. First up, the amount of financial expenditures is about 163% more than that of the other countries. So not surprisingly, when we use this gauge and explore other areas, you can identify that Russia, Venezuela, and Indonesia are countries with the highest amount of investments. Another thing to note here is the general investments and when they have occurred. The large majority are at the country level and pertain to transport and storage, energy, communications, and health. The full legend for the different sectors of investment can be viewed in the expenditure chart. Starting in 2016, we see that the investments begin to ramp up, with emergency response and education investments occurring in 2017, most likely to increase goodwill towards China during this time prior to signing the Memorandum of Understanding to join the BRI. An analyst might find it interesting to note that around the same time that China is pulling strings to have Nigeria change their policy regarding Taiwan, these investments of goodwill are occurring. As we've found out with modeling efforts, countries with this pattern are typically being courted to join the BRI. In Nigeria's case, this is certainly true as they joined the BRI just 1 year later in 2018, as denoted by the country's details chart. An analyst might want to dive into particular investments that have been made. The country-level financial expenditures can be found to the left sidebar. By scrolling through, we can see that most of the recent expenditures have been made regarding emergency relief and education expenditures, as denoted by the color code on the left side of the table. By hovering over an item, details for the expenditures can be seen, including the amount of the investment, the project status, so whether it was completed or not, and a description regarding the project. For example, this particular investment was made to bolster the China-African People-to-People Friendship Action Initiative by supporting the development and materials for a school. Some financial expenditures are granted at the regional or city level. Those located at the same location are clustered. For example, in southern Nigeria, 2 investment sites are marked with the cluster symbol, and by expanding the cluster, we can see the different investments. One interesting thing about this investment is that it's said to have been used to develop a Confucius Institute. Being familiar with this tool, an analyst would know that the Confucius Institutes are also tracked and they'd want to verify this information. By adding this layer to the map, we can confirm that there is a Confucius Institute located in the same city, and we can tell that the institute opened in 2009, shortly after the expenditure was logged. It also notes that the institute has since been closed. It's this type of layering of data that provides value in gathering information from multiple sources and seeing its geographical proximity to one another. Let's take a look at public opinion data now. In southern Nigeria, where the most concentrated financial expenditures have occurred, there tends to be a less favorable perception towards China than in northern regions. This doesn't necessarily prove a causation. In general, though, the perception toward China is favorable, and Chinese economic development is preferred to that of the U.S.'s economic development policies. Further public opinion variables can be explored by entering into the layer controller. So really, there's two main indicators we should look for. The first is that financial expenditures will increase that are aimed to buy the goodwill of people in the area, and that this goodwill tends to lead toward a favorable perception of China. Now that these factors have been determined, we can move over and see if any of these indicators are present within our Eswatini case. In sharp contrast to Nigeria, Eswatini has almost no data available. The only data seems to be U.S. immigration records, which are not useful as a comparison at this point. With the lack of information, we can conclude that there are no known financial expenditures which would suggest ongoing Chinese influence. And to confirm, we can look at nearby countries and see what the perception of China is in the areas within close proximity. So let's take a look at South Africa. In South Africa, specifically in Mpumalanga, there's very low favorability towards China, and this backs up the idea that influence in the general region is very low, and that Eswatini has no threat of being overcome by Chinese influence, and an analyst could be more confident now that it would remain in favor with the U.S. as a trade partner and would not be signing an MOU anytime soon. Although this demo only showed some of the tool's capabilities with a very limited use case, hopefully it provided some insight into the usefulness of layering information based off of its geographical proximity. We are grateful to be able to collaborate with mission partners to exchange information on the potential use cases for the tool and provide insight into open source data sets of relevance to ongoing missions. And we've been able to work in parallel with IDC West, NGA, and EDO as they build out high-side version of the interface. This interest has supported the redevelopment of our prototype as well to include more recent data and additional data sets. To view the work that's been ongoing in the classified space, you can search Go LAS on the classified Confluence page and then navigate to the BRI dashboard in the project list. Thank you for your interest in LAS's work on Chinese influence campaigns. To see the full extent of our data and visit the prototype, you can go to bri-dashboard.ncsu-las.net.